Sergeant Daniel Hayes stepped onto the cracked pavement of his hometown after 2 years overseas. His heart raced as he walked down Willow Lane, carrying only a worn duffel bag and the hope of a warm welcome. He hadn't told anyone about his return. He wanted to surprise his family. The small white house came into view, its porch light glowing faintly in the dusk. Memories of laughter, family dinners, and his little sister Emily's cheerful voice filled his mind. He imagined her running into his arms, his mother crying tears of joy, and his father patting his shoulder with pride. But when the door opened, only Emily stood there. She froze at the sight of him, her lips trembling. Daniel's grin widened, but then it faltered. Something was wrong. Emily's face, once so full of light, now carried shadows. Her eyes darted nervously, and she instinctively tugged the sleeve of her sweater down her wrist. "Emily," Daniel whispered, setting his bag on the floor. "It's me." Tears welled in her eyes. She rushed forward and hugged him tightly, but he felt her body flinch as his arms brushed against her back. He pulled away slightly, his soldier's instincts sharp. That's when he noticed it. Faint bruises peeking from beneath her sleeve, a hidden cut near her temple. Daniel's chest tightened. His little sister had always been the heart of the family, full of laughter and innocence. Now she seemed broken, fragile, and afraid. Before he could speak, heavy footsteps echoed from deeper inside the house. A man's voice barked angrily. "Emily, who the hell are you talking to?" Emily stiffened, her face pale. Daniel's jaw clenched. The war he thought he'd left behind had just found its way home. Daniel's eyes hardened as the man's voice thundered closer. Emily gripped his arm desperately, whispering, "Please, Danny, don't say anything. Not now." Her voice shook, heavy with fear. Before Daniel could answer, a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped into the living room. His shirt was half-buttoned, a beer bottle in one hand. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Daniel standing protectively in front of Emily. "And who the hell are you?" the man barked, his tone dripping with hostility. Daniel squared his shoulders, his military instincts kicking in. "Her brother," he said firmly, "Sergeant Daniel Hayes. I just got home." The man smirked, his eyes flicking to Emily. "You didn't tell me your brother was coming back. Guess surprises run in the family." He took a long swig of his beer, then leaned in too close to Emily, making her shrink back. Daniel noticed the way Emily's hands trembled, the way she avoided eye contact. Every bruise, every nervous movement painted a story Daniel didn't want to believe. Rage burned inside him, but he kept his tone calm. "Is this the reason you look like this?" Daniel asked softly, his eyes never leaving his sister's face. Emily's lips parted, but no words came out. A tear slid down her cheek, and she quickly shook her head, as if terrified to admit the truth. The man chuckled darkly. "Don't get any ideas, soldier boy. She's my wife now. What happens in this house is none of your business." Daniel's jaw tightened, fists clenching at his sides. He wanted to strike, but he knew one wrong move could make things worse for Emily. In that moment, Daniel made a silent vow he'd protect his sister, no matter what it cost him. The room grew heavy, the silence broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Daniel stood tall, his broad frame blocking Emily from her husband's view. The man, whose name Daniel now heard Emily whisper, Mark, smirked as if he owned the entire house. Daniel's voice was low but sharp. "Emily's my sister. If I see another mark on her, you'll answer to me." Mark laughed bitterly, leaning against the doorway. "You think just because you wear a uniform you can waltz in here and play hero? This isn't the battlefield, soldier. This is my home. My wife." He emphasized the last word, glaring at Emily, who flinched under his gaze. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes burning with controlled fury. "You don't hurt family. Not mine. Not ever." Mark slammed his beer bottle on the table, the glass clinking loudly. He took a step forward, chest puffed. "And what are you going to do? Hit me? Kill me? You think that'll fix anything? She'll never leave me." Emily's soft sob cut through the tension. "Please stop. Both of you." Her hands trembled as she tried to stand between them, but Daniel gently moved her behind him again. "I don't want trouble," Daniel said, though his fists told another story. "But if you touch her again, you'll regret it." Mark leaned in, so close that Daniel could smell the stench of alcohol on his breath. "Try me." For a heartbeat, the two men stood locked in a silent war. Daniel could almost hear the battlefield echoing in his head. But this fight was different. This was for Emily's soul. And Daniel knew this was only the beginning. Mark's smirk twisted into something darker. Without warning, he grabbed Emily's wrist, yanking her toward him. She winced in pain, trying to pull free. Daniel's blood boiled. In 2 strides, he was on them. His hand clamped on Mark's arm, squeezing with a strength forged on battlefields. "Let her go," Daniel growled. Mark snarled, his pride wounded. He shoved Emily aside, sending her stumbling into the couch. "Stay out of this, soldier boy. She's mine." Daniel stepped forward, towering over him. "She's your wife, not your property. You don't get to hurt her." Mark's temper flared. He swung his fist, aiming for Daniel's jaw. Years of combat training kicked in. Daniel ducked effortlessly, his reflexes sharp. His counter came swift, a firm shove to Mark's chest that sent him crashing into the wall. Emily cried out, rushing between them again. "Please, stop, before someone gets hurt." Her voice trembled with fear, not just of the violence, but of the consequences. Mark wiped blood from his lip, his eyes narrowing with rage. "You think you can come back here and run this house? You've been gone for years. You don't know what's been happening." Daniel's voice softened, though his fists remained ready. "I know enough. I see the bruises Emily's fear. That's all I need to know." Emily clutched Daniel's arm, whispering, "Please don't. If he gets angrier, it'll only get worse later." Daniel's heart sank. His sister was trapped in fear, unable to imagine a life beyond Mark's shadow. Mark pointed a trembling finger at Daniel. "You've just declared war in my house." Daniel locked eyes with him. "Then I'll fight it. For her." The tension in the room was thick, every second dragging heavier than the last. Mark's face twisted with fury, his pride bruised more than his body. He jabbed a finger at Daniel, his voice sharp as broken glass. "You don't belong here. This is my house, my wife, my rules. Pack your bags, soldier boy, because if you don't leave tonight, you'll regret it." Daniel stood his ground, his broad frame unyielding. "This is my family. You can't order me out." Mark let out a harsh laugh. "Family? You've been gone for years, chasing glory in some desert. Where were you when she cried herself to sleep? Where were you when I had to keep her in line?" His cruel words made Emily flinch. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Keeping her in line? You mean breaking her down, leaving bruises, making her afraid to breathe? That's not being a husband, that's being a coward." Mark's face reddened, and for a moment Daniel thought he might lunge again. Instead, he pointed toward the door. "Leave, or I'll make sure the police drag you out. And guess whose side they'll take? Mine." A decorated soldier turned violent intruder. That's how the story will sound. Emily's eyes widened with panic. "Mark, please." Her voice broke as she looked between them, torn in terror. Daniel's heart ached at her desperation, but he refused to back down. "You can throw me out, call the police, call whoever you want, but I'm not leaving Emily in this prison you call a marriage." Mark leaned closer, his breath hot with malice. "Then you've signed your own death warrant, Hayes." Emily clutched Daniel's arm, whispering through tears. "Danny, you don't know how dangerous he really is." Daniel's eyes hardened. "Then it's time I found out." Mark's rage boiled over. He snatched a glass from the coffee table and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, shards scattering across the floor. Emily jumped with a cry, covering her face. "Get out!" Mark roared, advancing on Daniel. "Or I'll make you crawl out." Daniel didn't flinch. He stood like a wall, eyes cold, fists at his sides. "Touch me, and you'll regret it. Touch her again, and you'll never walk away." Mark swung wildly, fueled more by alcohol than strength. Daniel blocked the punch with practiced ease and twisted Mark's wrist until he dropped to his knees, howling in pain. For a moment, Daniel wanted to finish it, to end the threat right there. But Emily's sobs stopped him. "Danny, please," she begged, grabbing his arm. "If you hurt him, it'll only get worse." Daniel released his grip, shoving Mark backward. Mark stumbled into the couch, clutching his wrist, his face contorted with hate. He bellowed so loud the neighbors must have heard. And they did. A knock rattled the front door, followed by a worried voice. "Everything all right in there?" It was Mrs. Whitaker, the elderly neighbor. Mark's eyes widened. He scrambled up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Stay quiet," he hissed at Emily, then shot Daniel a venomous glare. But Daniel wasn't about to stay silent. He marched to the door and opened it. Mrs. Whitaker gasped at the sight of Emily's tear-streaked face and the broken glass littering the floor. "Do I need to call the police?" she asked, clutching her phone. Before Daniel could answer, Mark barked, "This is private business. Stay out of it." Daniel met the old woman's worried eyes. His voice was steady, full of resolve. "Call them." Red and blue lights flashed through the curtains as two officers stepped onto the porch. Their radios crackled, hands resting on holstered belts. Mrs. Whitaker stood nearby, arms folded tightly across her chest. Mark straightened his shirt, plastering a pitiful expression on his face. The broken glass on the floor glittered like evidence waiting to be spun. As the officers entered, he pointed at Daniel. "There he is," Mark shouted. "He barged into my house, attacked me, and threatened my wife. Look at my wrist, he nearly broke it." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's a lie. I stopped him from hurting my sister. Ask Emily, she'll tell you." Both officers turned to Emily, who stood trembling near the couch, her sleeve pulled nervously down over her bruised arm. One officer asked gently, "Ma'am, is this true? Did your husband hurt you?" Emily opened her mouth, tears forming. Her eyes darted between Mark's threatening glare and Daniel's pleading expression. Fear chained her tongue. I don't—" Her voice cracked, barely audible. Mark stepped in quickly, draping an arm around her shoulders. "She's scared because this soldier broke into our home after being gone for years. He's unstable, probably dealing with war trauma." His voice dripped with fake concern. The officer frowned, scribbling in his notebook. "Sergeant Hayes, we'll need your statement." Daniel took a deep breath. "I came home to see my family. I found my sister covered in bruises. He's the one abusing her, not me," Mark scoffed. "Convenient story. A man trained for combat blaming a husband who only wanted peace." Emily's silent tears betrayed the truth, but her silence made it invisible. Daniel clenched his fists. He realized this battle wouldn't be won with strength alone. It would require proof. After the police left with only warnings, the house fell into a tense silence. Mark stormed off to the bedroom, muttering curses under his breath. Emily sat curled on the couch, her face pale, her hands shaking. Daniel knelt beside her, gently taking her hands in his. "Em, they won't believe me without proof," he whispered, "but I promise you, I'll find it." Emily's eyes filled with fear. "Danny, don't. If he finds out you're digging around, he'll—" She stopped, glancing toward the bedroom door, her voice trembling. "He'll hurt us both." Daniel shook his head. "He's already hurting you. I'm not letting this continue." That night, while Mark snored heavily in the bedroom, Daniel quietly searched the house. His soldier's instincts guided him through the shadows. In the trash bin, he found shredded pieces of paper, bills, all in Emily's name, unpaid and piling up. Mark had drained her accounts. In the laundry basket, Daniel noticed long-sleeved shirts stained faintly with blood at the cuffs. His jaw tightened. He gently folded them back, careful not to disturb Emily's attempts to hide her suffering. Finally, in the drawer of the bedside table Mark carelessly left ajar, Daniel found what he needed, photos on Mark's phone. He scrolled quickly, his stomach twisting at the images, Emily with swollen cheeks, bruises on her arms, her eyes hollow with fear. Mark had kept them like trophies. Daniel's fists clenched so tight his knuckles whitened. Every picture was a bullet of truth, proof the world couldn't ignore. He tucked the phone into his pocket just as the floorboards creaked. A shadow loomed in the doorway. Mark's voice cut through the darkness, low and dangerous. "What the hell do you think you're doing with my phone, soldier?" Daniel froze, Mark's shadow stretching across the floor like a predator's. The phone felt heavy in his hand, loaded with the power to end this nightmare. But Mark's eyes had already locked on it. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Mark growled, stepping into the room. His breath reeked of alcohol, but his rage was sharp, focused. "Sneaking into my things, trying to turn my wife against me." Daniel stood, his stance steady, the phone hidden behind his back. "I don't need to turn her against you. You did that yourself." Mark lunged, grabbing Daniel by the collar, shoving him against the dresser. The wood cracked under the impact. Daniel's grip tightened around the phone, refusing to let go. "Give it back!" Mark roared, his fists slamming into Daniel's ribs. Pain shot through him, but Daniel had endured worse on battlefields. He twisted, breaking free, and shoved Mark hard. Mark stumbled, then charged again like a bull. This time, Daniel ducked low, sweeping his legs. Mark crashed to the floor, cursing violently. The noise jolted Emily awake. She appeared at the doorway, eyes wide with terror. "Stop!" she screamed, clutching her chest. "Please don't!" But Daniel knew there was no stopping now. Mark scrambled up, snatching a lamp from the nightstand, swinging it like a weapon. The lampshade tore off as it smashed into the wall inches from Daniel's head. Daniel countered with a swift punch to Mark's jaw, sending him sprawling across the bed. He pulled Emily behind him, phone still in hand. "This ends tonight," Daniel hissed. "You're not touching her again." Mark wiped blood from his lip, a twisted grin spreading. "You think one phone will save her? I'll bury you before anyone sees it." Emily clung to Daniel's arm as Mark staggered toward the door, blood dripping from his lip, fury blazing in his eyes. "You won't get far," he spat. "This town knows me. Nobody's going to believe your war stories." Daniel tightened his grip on the phone, heart pounding. The photos inside were his only weapon, the proof that could break Mark's mask. But if Mark got it back, Emily's nightmare would continue. Suddenly, a loud knock shook the front door. "Police, open up!" Emily gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Mark froze, his smug expression faltering for the first time. "You called them?" he snarled. Mrs. Whitaker's voice echoed from outside. "Officers, check inside. He's been hitting her again." Daniel seized the moment. "Stay behind me, Emily." He strode toward the living room, but Mark lunged, tackling him to the floor. The phone slid across the carpet, stopping just inches from the doorway where the police stood. "Stay down!" Mark shouted, pinning Daniel's arm. His fists rained down, but Daniel twisted his body, years of training guiding him. With a surge of strength, he flipped Mark off and scrambled toward the phone. The door burst open, 2 officers rushing in. Their hands went straight to their weapons, unsure who was the aggressor. Mark, ever the manipulator, pointed at Daniel. "That's him. He broke in, attacked me, and stole my phone." Daniel, chest heaving, held the phone high. "This isn't his phone. It's the evidence of what he's been doing to my sister." The officers exchanged wary glances. One stepped forward cautiously. "Hand it over, Sergeant." Daniel locked eyes with Emily, her silent plea giving him courage. With steady hands, he offered the phone. "See for yourself." The officer took the phone from Daniel's hand, scrolling quickly through the gallery. At first, his expression was unreadable. Then his jaw tightened, eyes narrowing as the photos told their silent story. Emily's bruised arms, her swollen face, the tears that had been captured like cruel trophies. Mark lunged forward. "Those are fake. He staged them to frame me." The officer held up a hand, halting him. "Enough." He turned the screen toward his partner, who grimaced at the evidence. "These aren't staged. They're time-stamped, consistent, and clearly show repeated abuse." Emily broke down, sobbing into her hands. "It's true," she whispered through tears. "He's been hurting me for years. I was too scared to tell anyone." Mark's face paled. His confident mask cracked, revealing panic. "She's lying. She's just weak. She needs me." Daniel stepped forward, his voice low but sharp. "No, Mark. She doesn't need you. She needs freedom. And now she finally has proof." The officer clicked the cuffs onto Mark's wrists with a decisive snap. "Mark Whitaker, you're under arrest for domestic assault, battery and coercive control. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." Mark thrashed, shouting curses, but the officers forced him toward the door. Neighbors had gathered outside, watching as the man who once strutted with arrogance was dragged away in disgrace. Emily collapsed against Daniel's chest, trembling. He held her tightly, whispering, "It's over, Em. You're safe now." For the first time in years, Emily felt the heavy chains around her heart loosen. The shadows in the house began to lift, replaced by the faintest glimmer of hope. Daniel kissed the top of her head. "He can't hurt you anymore." But deep inside, Daniel knew the road to healing had only just begun. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Mark was led in, wrists shackled, his eyes darting angrily toward Emily. He wore a suit, trying to mask the darkness everyone had begun to see. The judge, stern and composed, called the case to order. Daniel sat in the gallery, his uniform crisp, his presence solid as a rock. He caught Emily's nervous glance and gave her a reassuring nod. "You can do this," he whispered before she took the stand. Emily's hands trembled as she adjusted the microphone. For years, silence had been her prison, but now the weight of truth pressed at her lips. She looked at the judge, then at the jury, and finally at Mark. "He broke me," she began, her voice shaking. "Not just my body, but my spirit. Every bruise, every scar. He told me it was my fault. He said no one would believe me." Her tears slid freely, but her voice grew steadier. "But my brother believed me. He gave me the courage to stand here today." Mark slammed his hand on the table, shouting, "Lies! She's twisting everything." The judge's gavel cracked. "Order! One more outburst and you'll be removed." The prosecutor presented the photos, the medical reports, and Mrs. Whittaker's testimony. Piece by piece, Mark's facade crumbled. The jury watched, their expressions hardening against him. Emily took a deep breath. "I lived in fear every day. But I refuse to live in fear anymore. He doesn't own me. Not now, not ever again." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge leaned forward, moved by her strength, Daniel's eyes filled with pride. For the first time, Emily's voice wasn't a whisper. It was a weapon, sharp and undeniable. The battle was nearly won. The courtroom was tense as the jury filed back into their seats. Every step echoed like thunder in Emily's chest. She clutched the edge of the witness stand, her knuckles white, Daniel's steady gaze locked on her. The judge cleared his throat. "Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreman, a middle-aged woman with resolute eyes, stood. "We have, Your Honor." Time seemed to freeze. Emily's heartbeat pounded in her ears as the words rang out. "On the charge of aggravated assault and domestic abuse, we find the defendant, Mark Stevenson, guilty." A gasp rippled through the room. Mark's face twisted in fury as he leapt to his feet. "This is a setup. She's lying." Two bailiffs rushed to restrain him, pinning him back into his chair. His shouts grew desperate, but no one listened anymore. The judge's gavel struck sharply. "Order! Mr. Stevenson, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. Sentencing will follow, but until then, you are remanded into custody with no bail." Emily's knees nearly gave out. For the first time in years, the air in her lungs felt light. Tears blurred her vision, but they were no longer tears of fear. They were tears of release. Daniel stepped forward as she descended from the stand. He wrapped his arms around her, whispering, "It's over, Em. You're free." Mrs. Whittaker smiled warmly from the gallery, dabbing at her eyes. Even the prosecutor gave Emily a nod of respect. Emily looked toward the barred door where Mark was being dragged away. His power was gone. His threats meant nothing. For the first time, Emily wasn't a victim. She was a survivor, and this was just the beginning. Weeks had passed since the verdict. The town that once whispered behind closed doors now openly embraced Emily with compassion. For the first time, she could walk through the streets without fear shadowing her steps. Daniel stayed by her side, making sure she never felt alone. They spent quiet evenings on the porch, watching sunsets melt into the horizon. "You've always been stronger than you thought," Daniel told her one night. Now, the world finally sees it too. Emily had started attending a support group for survivors. Sharing her story wasn't easy, but each time she spoke, another woman found the courage to step forward. She realized her pain was not just her own. It was a bridge for others to find healing. Mrs. Whittaker often dropped by with pies and warm hugs, reminding Emily that kindness still thrived in the world. Together, they planted a small garden behind the house, a symbol of regrowth. Each flower that bloomed whispered hope. Mark's sentencing came and went. He was gone for good, locked away where he could harm no one. For Emily, the chains of fear had been broken. She no longer woke up in the middle of the night expecting footsteps outside her door. One morning, Emily stood before the mirror. The bruises had faded, but the scars, emotional and physical, remained. Yet instead of shame, she felt pride. They were proof she had survived, proof she had fought back. As the sun rose higher, Emily smiled. This was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new one. A life where her laughter was no longer silenced, where her choices were her own, and where hope finally outshined fear. For the first time in years, Emily was free.